friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. I am so excited today to have Jenny Blue on our Ripple Effect podcast. Jenny Blue is the founder of Blue Thistle Transformational Leadership, which offers executive coaching, team workshops, and the innovative Blue Thistle Life Design Blueprint methodology. With over 25 years of diverse experience in the tech industry, nonprofits, the public sector, corporate roles, and entrepreneurial ventures, Jenny has witnessed how compartmentalizing one's talents can lead to anxiety, burnout, and disconnection. This inspired her to develop mindfulness-based frameworks that integrate design thinking and coaching methodologies. Her expertise in mindfulness integration expanded during her time at Mind Body Align, where she led a team who implemented mindfulness curricula in schools, enhancing social and emotional literacy. As the current membership chair of the American Mindfulness Association, Jenny advocates for incorporating mindfulness across industries to foster conscious leadership and human-centered practices. At Blue Thistle Transformational Leadership, Jenny empowers clients and teams to embody their multidimensional selves through executive coaching, workshops, and her life design blueprint methodology. This system provides a framework for overcoming burnout by harmonizing career ambition, entrepreneurial vision, intellectual curiosities, and personal well-being into a cohesive, energized flow. Through Jenny's guidance, individuals and teams awaken to their limitless potential as emotionally intelligent leaders and entrepreneurs, integrating all facets of their journeys with mindful presence. I'm so glad to have this conversation today with Jenny. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on the podcast, and I'm excited to just have the chance to chat with you, get to know you a little better. And I know you have such a depth of practice to be able to share that with folks who might be listening.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me today. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So the first thing I would love is if you could just talk about maybe how you came to meditation and mindfulness, and how has that been a support for you in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really actually pretty funny how I came to mindfulness, because it was a happy accident in that I was writing for a local magazine, and it was a women's magazine. One of my first assignments was to write about being mindful and present during the holidays. So I didn't know a whole lot about it. I had a little bit of knowledge because I had read some Eckhart Tolle and was kind of a Wayne Dyer follower at the time. So I had kind of a broad concept. But through asking all the questions of those women, I learned, at least some basic concepts from them. And so that was sort of a seed that was planted. And then gradually my awareness of mindfulness came. And a few years later, I found myself really completely burned out from the job that I had, which we probably hear a lot from people that practice mindfulness. We come when we're in crisis sometimes. And so at the time, it seemed like life was sort of running me and not the other way around. And I felt like things were really out of control, and it was causing me a lot of anxiety. And I read on Facebook about a local facilitator who had a mindfulness company called Mind Body Align. And there were twice weekly sits there. So I decided to give it a try. I thought nothing else I had tried had worked. So why not? And I was hooked right away. And then, of course, building on that with neuroscience and everything, it really hooked me in it because it made sense to me intellectually. And I was seeing results pretty much right away. So it was really the one thing that allowed me to be sort of non-attached to some of the things that felt like they were out of control. So, after about 6 or 8 months of practicing, I actually went to work for Mind Body Align, first as their operations director, and then eventually was president of the company. And I spent nearly 7 years with them. So that's how
That's
it
an
came to be.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I love the way you put life running me, because I think so many times in our lives we feel, I mean, I don't know if victim is too strong of a word, but you victimized maybe by situations or things that are happening, and that, that feeling of lack of control or out of control, right, is one of the things that I think does lead people to want to find practice, right? To find the
Yes,
eye of the storm, so to speak, where they can be calm with everything spinning around them.
definitely. And definitely felt like life was a series of have tos rather
Hmm.
than choices. So mindfulness allowed me the opportunity to to get the space and then to start making conscious choices.
Yeah. I also heard that one of the results you mentioned is non-attachment, and that's actually, you know, for some people like part of the definition almost, right, of
Mhm.
mindfulness is to not be attached. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about what that means for you.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest concept for me to um, sort of grapple with on the cushion. Um, I felt like acceptance was a hard piece, and then the letting go of expectations and sort of, which leads us right into, this topic of welcoming. It was probably the hardest piece for me. The mechanics of everything, the sitting and breathing and learning box breath, that was all technical stuff, right? And this piece of accepting and not wanting to do things to fix it and sort of let things be, that was the challenging part for me. But once it comes, that role of non-attachment, you're able to just sort of recognize something for what it is and just let it be.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
takes practice though.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a hard one. It's a hard one for a lot of us, for sure. And I love that you started to segue for our topic for today. Thank
Right.
you. Yeah, today we are talking about welcoming, and I'd love to hear how you describe welcoming for yourself and how that's worked in relationship to your practice, which you just started to hit on. And yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I was really tickled that was going to be the topic that we would discuss today. I recently just had a conversation with someone who had just started practicing, so they were sort of in the bliss of the early days of practice. And I remember those days, the days when you thought you would sit on a cushion and relax, right? And but really the truth is, after you kind of get past that honeymoon phase, is lots of things come up in practice, and lots of thoughts and emotions will come, and sometimes it can be anger or frustration or curiosity. It doesn't have to be sort of a hard emotion. um, Practice can be a lot of things, and it can be tricky to welcome whatever's coming, um, and sometimes to just be with it rather than try to adjust or manipulate the experience in any kind of way, or conjure up something that's supposed to happen, that you think is supposed to happen in your practice. And we just touched on this. I think that alongside the welcoming really is that attitude of non-attachment, of really from the beginning of what you think practice should look like. that's sort of the first piece I sort of understood about the non-attachment was practice doesn't have to look like a certain thing.
Yeah, I recently did a presentation, and the organization that was hosting me did one of those online polls before I started. And the question was kind of a multiple choice about what is mindfulness, right? And one of the options was like clearing your mind of everything. That's what they're and that was the second most chosen answer, but after the correct one, which was, fully being present, etc. And so interesting that you say that, like, because folks often view meditation and mindfulness as creating a particular state, right?
Correct.
And it's a state in their minds that I hear from people, like it's blank, it's empty, it's completely peaceful, blissing out, something like that. And what you're just naming is that actually it's a radical welcoming of whatever is arising.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was just coaching someone yesterday and they said, oh, I need to meditate. It would be really good for me to clear my mind. And I was like, good luck with that. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I mean, definitely there are those pauses, those spaces between, right? So the more you practice, the longer you practice, those pauses get a little bit longer, but the mind just doesn't clear.
Yeah, for real. And I think that that's just so true in my experience too. I went on retreat in June. It was a week-long silent retreat. And the first 2 or 3 days was all the chatter about everything that was happening leading up to the retreat. And then I had a day or two where I felt settled and calm and at peace. And then as soon as I got to maybe day 5, it started all the chatter about leaving,
Right.
Yeah.
And even in that calm, your mind is still, you're still having chatter. It's just different chatter. It's chatter about how calm you are, like,
Exactly. Or
but
about
it's
the
still there.
meditation hall or looking out the window and seeing all the little creatures or whatever.
It's the classic eat, pray, love. I was thinking about decorating my meditation room. So,
Yeah, exactly. You're sitting on the cushion meditating and you're looking around going, God, this would be so much better if I just.
right, absolutely. We're just our minds do what they do, and that's where getting curious about everything it can be really fun to just be curious about what's coming and welcome it. Oh, that's interesting, and let it go.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing in curiosity into the welcoming because it's easier to welcome something if you're curious about it.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Even the
I
negative things, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I recently, I'm not sure why. Oh, I think I read a little article or something about it, about jealousy,
Mm,
right? And this is one of those emotions that we tend to try to push away or view as really negative, or God forbid we should admit to someone else that we feel it, And
right.
what I have been trying to do with that particular emotion when I do feel it, which I don't a lot, but it does arise for me, is just get curious, like why would I be jealous? Why would I?
Right.
Like it's so interesting to me. Like if I look at my life kind of objectively, I have everything I need. I don't need anything. So why would I be jealous, right? And that allows for the space to welcome that emotion and just be in relationship with it as opposed to shoving it, pushing it, trying to
Yeah,
ignore it or
I
deny it.
shouldn't be jealous, right? When the
Yeah,
reality is, okay, I am. So what's happening for me right here? What's this about? And just
exactly.
getting really curious about it. Is it that I want what somebody has or that I don't want them to have what they have? I mean, you can really dig into that.
Yeah, or some like unnamed
Yeah,
dissatisfaction or whatever is underneath it. But for
right.
me, there's always something underneath it, right? There's always something underneath it, like I don't know, the fear of missing out or you know,
Right.
whatever
That
it is, whatever it
that's the
is.
fun of it all. Is you just start peeling back layers, right? And learning more and more about yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other piece about welcoming that I love is that we can accept our whole self. Like we don't have to make us something that we're not. And that for me, especially as I've grown older, has been just so reassuring. Like I can just be who I am and feel okay about that.
Yeah, it definitely opens you up to being more compassionate to yourself and others,
Yeah.
the welcoming.
For sure, for sure. So speaking of that, how do you work with welcoming in relationships? So we've talked a little bit about on the cushion and with ourselves. And, outside of that formal meditation session, how are you able to bring this into your life?
Yeah, well, I think the practice has been particularly transforming, this practice of welcoming, um, and sort of how that showed up in relationship. I can give you a really poignant example. Is I recently, like a year and a half ago, lost my father to cancer. And so within all of that is a lot of opportunity to practice welcoming because there's a whole lot going on externally and internally. Um, and so from his diagnosis to his passing was only really a couple of months. And so there's this whirlwind of events and then the aftermath of all of that. So I sort of found myself facing a tsunami of thoughts and intense emotions. And then, there's all the relationships to the people around you that are sort of going through this thing too. But where welcoming really became crucial was just um, being able to embrace unpredictability, because that's a situation where while you're going through it and then the grief that comes afterwards, you don't have a lot of control. So you can sort of make a
Absolutely.
choice to lean in, or you can make a choice to sort of fight against it. So I think the practice really showed up for me and supported me. And so many people would say, "How are you doing?" And I'd say, "I'm so glad I have this deep mindfulness practice because it's really carried me through these months and now this year and a half since." Um, so yeah, in relationships and how it shows up, it's definitely, it allowed me to face emotions. It allowed me to be compassionate with myself and with other people, and really just being present even in those difficult moments, which we all face in one form or another at some point or another.
Yeah, so first I'm really sorry about your loss. It's hard to lose a parent. My dad passed just over 2 years ago. So I totally understand that. And I'm so happy that you had your practice to hold you and to support you through that because I know it was crucial for me. Um, yeah, to deal with death and dying is kind of the ultimate human experience.
Right.
In many Buddhist traditions, a lot of the meditations or most of the meditations are preparing folks to face their death in the best way.
Absolutely. So not to bring up a bummer of a topic, but it's one we all face. And it's
Absolutely.
really that time where, despite everything going on, I grew so much.
Right. And this is the ultimate welcoming the mortality of our loved ones, welcoming our own mortality. It's the ultimate act of welcoming because, I personally would love to die a good and peaceful death, right?
Yeah.
Who nobody knows how their death will happen. We all know we will die, but we don't know when or where or how. So this is the ultimate welcoming, and in some way, what we all practice for is welcoming the difficult.
Yes. And being just, again, going back to that curiosity, but also seeing all the attitudes of mindfulness come into play at different points
That's
in the
right.
process. You've got the acceptance piece, you've got the non-attachment, you've got to have gratitude within it. It was really fascinating to just be curious and welcome it and see what was coming up and not feeling like I needed to be in control of it all.
That's amazing. So good. It's reminding me of a little story that I have as like an anecdote in my practice. I was on retreat once. I think it was a 3-week retreat. I can't remember. But the one of the teachers in the retreat was a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher that was one of the folks really to bring meditation into the United States, like in the 60s.
Mhm.
And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was partly paralyzed, and so he had personal assistants that helped him because he couldn't dress himself and get around easily because of his paralysis. And so the guy that was leading this retreat was one of his personal assistants for many years. And he took Rinpoche to visit his good friend Suzuki Roshi, who was dying of cancer in the hospital. And it was going to be, I think, Chogyam Trungpa's last time to visit his friend who was nearing death. And so Chogyam Trungpa went in, visited with his friend, and when he came out, he was laughing. And this teacher said to him, "Why, Rinpoche? Why are you laughing? He's dying." And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, "Because he's so curious to see what it's going to be like to die." He said it was a great conversation. So, like this Buddhist master, because Suzuki Roshi was a Zen master, right? What his experience of dying of cancer was just to welcome it and really be curious about, like, this is something that I don't know how it's going to go. I wonder what's going to happen. And it wasn't for him. I'm sure it was painful. Like, I don't want to minimize he suffered from the disease, but
Right.
he really tried to bring this act of welcoming to his death. And that has always stayed with me. And your story just really resonates in the same way of just really how do you bring that attitude of welcoming and curiosity even to the most difficult.
Absolutely. And the practice is really it's just that, it's practice. It's our training, right? It's our training for how we are going to show up and move in and through the world. And so to see what you sort of trained for, we recently had the Olympics, and these folks go through, years and years of training, right, for that one moment. And that's sort of what this felt like, was like all this years of practice and training. And then when I needed that, it was there and I was ready for that moment. So
That's amazing and beautiful. Yeah, and I think it's like the greatest gift you can offer a loved one is to be able to hold space for them as they pass
absolutely.
and
It's
be with
really an
them.
honor. It's
It
really
is
an
an
honor.
honor. 100%, 100%. I felt that way with my dad. I was lucky enough to be with him in his last moments, and yeah, it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to share that with someone that you love.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling very uplifted by that story and very grateful that you shared it with us. And yeah, I think this is the hallmark of deep practice, is that when these things in our life that, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, whatever, we would have run from, right? That we're able now to be fully present with compassion and grace, curiosity, right? And really be there in a way that reinforces the humanity of the person that we're with.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, there's a dignity is the word that's coming into my head. There's a dignity to being held in that way and being able to hold space in that way. And it doesn't make the grief any less. So just to say, it's still so difficult.
But your practice just carries you on through that. Like, I've just learned, like, I can cry while doing anything now, and it's okay. It's really
That's
okay.
awesome.
Um,
Yeah, that's
so
so beautiful. Yeah, and that's a great welcoming right there, welcoming tears, because so many times we're trained not to show our tears, right? We
yes,
really,
we try to stop ourselves, and sometimes you just gotta let it be. But
yeah, I'm just thinking of, like, there's that expression, suck it up, right? Like, man up, like all of those things that we use to stamp down the tenderness and the tears that I think are sometimes. I mean, obviously there are some situations where you just have to push through. Like I'm not saying you never have to, but it can be really self-aggressive to not allow what's actually there.
Yeah, I'll share with you my yoga teacher, uh, Ginger Long is her name. She's an amazing yoga teacher. And we were doing tree pose. And of course, you're trying to balance, and sometimes we try to get really rigid while we're doing it. She said in this moment, it was just something that sort of came out in her prompts, and she said, "Your strength is in your softness." And that, I mean, along with a few other things, and that just really struck with me, and to the point where I had to write a blog post about it later. It's like, that's so true. Our strength is often in our softness.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of vulnerability and Brene Brown,
Hmm.
her work
Yes.
on vulnerability. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wonder if we could think of kind of the edges of welcoming. Are there times where you need to set boundaries around your welcoming or limits, or if there is challenging or toxic situations? Because this is often, you know, we're working in communities that have a lot of trauma, right? And
Yes.
so when we talk about forgiveness or trying to let things go, I want to just honor that that's not always workable, right? And so I'm just curious where you find the limits and how you work with that.
Yeah. What I want to say around that is we have to make sure to take care of ourselves in the midst of all of that, because we are working with so much trauma. And welcoming our thoughts and emotions is one thing, but welcoming behaviors is kind of a different, so while I'm more apt to let a situation sort of unfold and welcome it and see what's going to happen, there also has to be some, healthy boundaries around that as well, and making sure you're physically safe and emotionally safe, in situations as well. Um, and there's sometimes we're in community and something just sort of triggers us, right? And I just had a situation like that sort of come up where somebody was behaving in sort of a passive aggressive manner. So I wasn't in physical danger in any way. Um, but that's definitely a significant trigger for me. And so here I sort of balanced the welcoming with some boundaries. So I sort of recognized that I was being triggered, and I definitely acknowledge, when I can feel it in my body, right, from my practice. So I know what's sort of happening. So I'm welcoming those internal experiences, and I'm, you know, accepting my thoughts and emotions about the situation without necessarily even labeling them good or bad. Um, but there are times where I just need to create some space between, whatever the stimulus might be, right, and my response. So sometimes, just putting some space in there is one way you can welcome, but you still need that space in there so that you're not reacting, but responding. So maybe it's stepping away physically, taking a few deep breaths, um, and sort of separating that internal from the external. So, reminding myself that while I welcome my thoughts and emotions, I don't have to condone or accept inappropriate behavior. So that's kind of one way. And then, like I said, just, being able to then respond after I've created that space, so that I'm not, coming from a place of reaction, and I can have a calmer, more direct conversation with a person, um, and sort of addressing that behavior or the situation specifically, from maybe a little bit less judgmental place, but more factual, or and then being consistent, so I'm really aware of situations, and being sure that I'm consistent in the way I might handle a situation or a person. That's the other thing, is it can't be sort of okay today and not okay tomorrow. Um, we'll make mistakes along the way when we're figuring out what those boundaries are and where that line is between welcoming too much and maybe letting some kind of behavior situation kind of creep in.
Yeah, I really love the way that you frame that, where the welcoming part is welcoming what's happening internally to us in response to the world around us, and that
Right.
that internal work is actually the first thing before we can kind of find the most compassionate and clear response to a
Yes.
situation that doesn't feel right.
Yes, absolutely. That self-awareness. So if it's something really, I don't, I can feel it in my body. Usually it's a heart racing, or I feel it in my stomach and I'm like, something's happening here that's not okay for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that's why the practice is so important, because then when it happens in the real world, it's almost like I can just really easily shift into like, oh, something's happening in my body. This is telling me something's not sitting right with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sort of can sort of automatically respond. I don't have to think it through too much. I'm like, oh, I need to maybe create some space here. It's not so conscious because I've practiced it for so long. Um, but professional relationships, when things get kind of tricky, um, I don't know, that's a tricky situation. It might look like welcoming feelings about frustration at like a coworker's, chronic lateness. You might be really frustrated. It might not be like an unsafe situation or super traumatic situation, but you're noticing, oh, I'm really frustrated with this person or whatever. Um, and again, it's welcoming that you're feeling frustrated, and yet you still need to sort of maybe address that with the person. So having some healthy boundaries around it. But I think that the practice just makes you more compassionate when you're doing that, and more clear, which is actually more kind.
I agree. I think when we can be very clear about our own needs and our own limits, um, it is way more compassionate than being, like we try to be kind, and I'm doing air quotes here. Like you're trying to
Right.
be kind and like prevent the other person from feeling bad. And so sometimes when we do that, not that we shouldn't be kind, but in the name of that, we muddle up the message because we're trying to soften sometimes. At least I, as a woman, feel like I hear ladies doing, well, I kind of think, you know what I mean? Instead of just like,
Yes.
I always fall on the direct side, like, this is what happened. This is how it made me feel. And I really feel like I need, something else. And this is an example of what that might look like. Um,
Right, right. The other can be
yeah.
a bit confusing. So
Yes.
that's why I
Yeah.
feel like it's a little more kind to be direct, but sort of this balanced approach really helps us to maintain, our professional relationships, and um, preserve our personal well-being at the same time. So, it allows us to address issues constructively with folks and without really compromising our mindfulness practice.
Yeah, yeah, that's really wonderful. And I also love the way you talked about how in touch with your body sensations practice has allowed you to be, and that might be the first indication that something's not quite right.
Yeah, it usually is for me.
Me too, me too.
Before
And
before I even have the conscious thought, the feeling is already there.
yeah, the body sensation or the emotion is there tipping us off that something's not quite right. In my world, I often get tightness in my shoulders and neck.
Hmm. Yes.
And that like tension in my shoulder, something's going on for me that's stressing me out, that's not landing right when I have muscle tension there. So that would be the time to pause and be like, there's that curiosity, what's going on there?
Right.
Yeah. To try to bring it to the conscious mind. Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
bodies do know.
Our bodies do know. That's the Bessel van der Kolk. The body keeps the score,
Does
right?
keep the score. Yep.
It does. It does. And it's how to turn that into kind of actionable knowledge for us, right? What do I need to do in my life, in my world, in my practice to support myself now that this is here? Yeah.
Welcoming can be scary sometimes too.
Say more about that.
I mean, if you know something is going to be challenging, that leaning into it, it's sort of like, you know, jumping into a pool from a really high diving board. Sometimes you're looking over the edge thinking, oh, this is going to be so hard. And you've got to do it and you'll grow from it, but it's not always easy. It's like, oh, I've got to jump anyway, even though I'm
Yeah.
scared.
Yes. And that's a little bit making me think back to what we were saying about non-attachment, right? We want things to turn out in a certain way and to be a certain way. And when what's present doesn't match that and it feels like this isn't what I wanted.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. The attitudes of mindfulness are so closely connected and
Yes.
sometimes intertwined or maybe slightly overlapping, but definitely as I was thinking about this topic, um, the two things that really came up a lot for me were curiosity and non-attachment.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, right? It makes sense that if we have such a fixed mind and we are very stuck on a particular outcome or way of being or doing, it's really hard to welcome what doesn't fit that mold, right?
Absolutely. And that sort of non-striving sort of touches in there too. And like if we have this
Yes.
picture of perfection, which we know doesn't
Mm,
really exist, but we can strive for excellence and still when things go wrong, welcome it. It's sort of letting go this idea that everything has to be perfect or understanding the difference between perfectionism and striving for excellence. And then where does the
yeah,
non-striving sort of fit in there? It all kind of works in the same direction as, I can want things to be excellent and still have some allowance in there for things to be as they are, or
right.
something goes maybe not the way you planned, to be adaptable in the situation.
Yeah, and that's another like paradox of practice, right? That in beginner's mind, Zen mind, beginner's mind, the Shunrei Suzuki Roshi book, there's a thing in there where he says to his students, you're perfect just the way you are, and you could use a
And
little work. Right?
yeah, I use that
And
one a
you could
lot.
I do too, because it's so perfect. It's wonderful because you can just be okay with whatever's going on right now, and you can work to be a better human being, better self, better wife, better mother, whatever, right? Because we all have our foibles and our lapses and everything. And like you could be okay with just who you are. It's a paradox. It's a bit of a paradox. So there's the welcoming of whatever's there, and you can continue to work on yourself.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely a more yes and thinker now.
Yeah.
And I definitely, after having practiced for a number of years, um, recognize that there can be two truths in many situations, and you can welcome them both.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I think that just because of the political season we're in right now, we get stuck in the black and white thinking culturally, socially, right? It's either
Yes,
this or it's that. And maybe it's a both and. Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
And maybe we could just be okay with it being both and. I don't have to have my way and your way. It could be okay to be both.
Yeah, when we're open to that, it definitely changes our perspective of if one of us wins, one of us loses, or you
Yes.
know,
Yes.
or
100%.
someone has to win.
That's right.
So it does
That's
open us up to compromise sometimes, or a more compassionate approach.
yeah. Yeah. It feels much less aggressive to me.
Yes.
Much less aggressive. Yeah. I love that. So I'm curious. I've been asking everyone that's on the podcast if they have a favorite mindfulness resource that they could share with our listeners.
Yeah, so a colleague from the American Mindfulness Association, I'm on their advisory board, just sent me a resource that I'm just digging into, but it's fascinating so far. And it is from the Mindfulness Initiative. And I don't know a whole lot about the organization, appears to be from the UK, but they have a resource on their website called A Field Book for Mindfulness Innovators. And I have been digging into that. It's really fascinating. The document sort of invites innovators to explore, essential ideas and resources and frameworks as they navigate the field of mindfulness.
That
So
sounds
literally just got dropped in my inbox a couple days ago, and I'm just, working through it and really digging it.
That is amazing. Yeah, I'll be checking that one out for sure. That sounds like my cup of tea for
Yeah,
sure.
great. If you just Google the Mindfulness Initiative, you'll find it right on their website.
Awesome. I definitely will do that. That's a great resource. Is there anything that you found in there in particular that has stood out?
From what I can see so far, it looks like there's maybe a little bit of like design thinking in
Okay.
there, which I love. So I'm currently um, a life coach, and I coach, entrepreneurs, and I work with organizations on bringing mindful, human-centered practices into their organizations. And I use a lot of design theory and design thinking in those processes and in the workshops. So I was really excited to see that sort of show up.
That's awesome. I'm excited to check that one out. Well, Jennifer, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that was on your mind when we first talked about you coming on the podcast that you wanted to share that, yeah, anything left there that you wanted to touch on?
There's nothing that we didn't really touch on. I would just say, to anyone listening, just, stick with your practice, consistency over length of time on the mat, and just keep at it and work those micro practices in throughout the day, um, and keep at it, because when you really need that support, it'll be there for you.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. The consistency piece, don't try to sit for 3 hours twice a week. Try to do 15 minutes every day instead.
Yeah, if you can do that 15 and then work some smaller
Yep.
practices in throughout the day, I think that's where you really see some great benefit.
Yep, 100%. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a great pleasure to chat with you again and get to know you and hear a little bit more about your story.
And thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Say Something Studios.